comment on that a little bit because at least if there's a lot of the whole, I mean, at a given point where CRISPR becomes a thing and babies and humans and everything start being modified, then they're gonna start making like, superhumans, which is making them more able to survive, more fit compared to everybody else. It's just it's gonna be like 20 billion of us, well, humans, then compared to like we're already struggling and it's like so many of us, like hitting like 7 or something. I don't know how many we are so far. It's just kind of like one of those. Kind of, yes, go science, but at the same time, the planet can only support so many, and with all of these changes, and I understand the ethics and everything, but it's just complicated in almost every single aspect.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, the statement was that, the genetic modification isn't just about the genes and genetics. There's so many more sociological effects and implications that happen. And it's totally true, right? There's so much that goes into it beyond it. I think it's one of those tough things, like with Facebook, like, we didn't know that all of us would like lose our privacy when we started posting pictures 20 years ago. Like, we're just like trying to hit on that attractive person we saw or whatever. And I don't think we yet know the implications or how society's going to progress or what's going to happen when this stuff actually starts being used a lot more often. And I think we just have to kind of learn as we go forward, see what's happening, see how society is at that point in time, and respond to it as best as we can. Because I don't know what else we really can do, right? We want to go forward with the technology, but we also want to do it in a safe and productive manner. There's a lot to take into account, and I don't know who's the correct person to make those decisions. I probably wouldn't put me in charge. But,
Yeah, what is your forecast regarding the next breakthrough coming from the biohacking community?
The next breakthrough. I don't think about like biohacking or science outside traditional environments in terms of like breakthroughs, right? Because if you think about the same thing with like computers, and imagine in like the 1980s or 90s, and people were like, what is open source? What are the big breakthroughs in open source? And everybody would be like, I don't know. They made some, like I wrote some open source programs around that time, and like people would just be like, I don't know, Netscape or something, which doesn't even exist nowadays. I think about it more in terms of like how many people can start doing this stuff, right? We were talking earlier a little bit, and I was saying that like in the U.S. there's about 200,000 active research scientists, biomedical research scientists with PhDs. 200,000. There's about 200,000 people with master's degrees, and the rest, maybe about 1 million. These are numbers from the NSF and NIH. About around 1 million more-ish, 500,000 to 1 million, no exact numbers, have a bachelor's degree or less, right? So you're talking a total of less than 1.5 million biomedical research scientists in the U.S., right? And then you think about, wow, there's like 7,000 rare diseases. And even if you just focused on those, the split is pretty rough. When most people are working on, at least half, maybe more, are working on basic research science. It's a whole nother discussion, but, right? We need more research scientists. We need more people doing biomedical research, like, period. Just learning this stuff. That, to me, that's a breakthrough in general. If we doubled the scientific population, that would be a huge breakthrough. Like, Doug's contributions, what I'm trying to contribute, like, that cannot be understated, that, like, doubling the scientific population would be amazing. Like I was saying, there were people who work in, like, human mammalian cell culture. You're talking 10,000, maybe 15,000 people, right? Like, that's such a tiny number. Holy cow. Like, Doug could, in his whole life here, could train more people than that. Right? That's crazy. That's crazy. That few people. So if you learned how to do that, right? Like, science is going to get pushed forward so much more. That, to me, is what I'm super pumped about. Not like people doing any crazy research experiments. Those are cool. People are trying to push boundaries with those. with gene therapies and stuff, and developing new types of gene therapies and things. But I think, to me, that's the exciting thing.
So,
Oh, wait, next.
okay. So, as somebody that's sort of leading in the field of talking about this kind of issue, if any issues arose in the future of, I don't know, like the previously mentioned, like the viruses or something like that, if any of that ever happened, what would be your protocol or response to something like that happening? What would you?
So if there was a zombie apocalypse, you're saying what would be my plan?
Well, yeah.
You know, yeah, here's the thing is, so like nowadays vaccines are, as we're seeing now with the coronavirus, I think it's got another name now, I don't even know, like COVID-63B or something, but like you can go from having a virus or something like that to making a vaccine, especially if it's like a DNA vaccine, pretty damn fast. And especially if you don't have to go through proper regulation and everything like that, right? So right now, it takes on average 10 years for a drug to be approved by the FDA. 10 years, right? In 2018, there was something like, oh gosh, I think the number was 59. It was like 59 or low 60s drugs that were approved in a year. Of those, 65% of those were just reformulations of old drugs. It's pretty messed up. So like, there's this crazy story about like what they do. I don't know if you all know what like enantiomers are. So you can have two different isomers of a drug that can work exactly the same. This one version of this drug, they gave you both of these, right? That was the drug, it was unpurified. After 10 years, it becomes a generic. So what they did was they purified it, so then they only had one form of it, and then they got approval to sell it again. And you're like, that doesn't even make any sense, right? They're selling the same exact drug, basically. They just purified it, but the FDA gives them approval. They get, rights to it. They can sell it, mark up the price because they say it's slightly better or some bullshit. And these are the drugs that are getting put on the market. Of the 59 drugs a year, 59, like how pitiful is that, right? If you think about like the 7,000 rare diseases that are out there, how long is it going to take us if we're doing 59 drugs a year? How long is it going to take us if 65% of those are just reformulations? Like, people aren't getting treated. Our healthcare system is not working, the FDA and regulation and everything like that. So it's just like, if you have the opportunity, have your own lab, get some DNA synthesized, try to inject yourself with it so you develop antibodies to the virus, and then go hide out in some desert with your guns and stuff. All right, what's up?
I'm just curious. I'm new to this concept of CRISPR, and I'm wondering, CRISPR-Cas9, would that help eliminate disabilities, genes related to disabilities in the future, do you think? Like deafness or physical mutations, do you think that would help eliminate that in the future?
It's possible. One of the problems is when you're older and you've already developed, we don't understand these processes enough to completely be able to overcome everything, right? So when you're growing, you grow your limbs and, grow your hair and eyes and all these stuff. So like regrow your limb, that's tough. We kind of have an understanding, but we really don't, right? If we understand the genetic basis of it, it's a lot easier. If like we say, somebody's deaf because they're missing a certain protein or something like that, then what you can do is you can provide a gene therapy that might be able to help that if somebody's researching that. But a lot of disabilities tend to be happen during development or happening at birth or something. So it's more difficult to overcome these things. Now, if you use CRISPR before in the embryo, so before the child is born, it's 100% you could overcome these if they're genetic based. That's something that is completely possible. You don't even need CRISPR. Here's the thing, is like our technology is so good that we can sequence embryos. You can sequence the genetics of embryos and select embryos that don't have these mutations. Now, not everybody wants that or is interested in that, and that's totally understandable. I don't think that everybody should have to be a certain way or live a certain way. They should be able to have whatever they want with their body, but like it's possible. It sure is possible.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
On a similar topic, actually, earlier you mentioned, earlier you talked about eugenics, and you said that you didn't think individual modification would be used for that it would be used rather for self-expression. And then, almost in the same breath, you described that if you would change were to genetically edit yourself, you would modify your body to be more in line with societal standards for what a body should look like. And a lot of the experience I've heard of with body modification in the past, there is a lot of pressure for people to look a certain way. People pay a lot of money for toxic medications to make their skin look lighter. I have a cousin who had surgery to make her nose smaller. And you see, and have you put any thought into the social pressure from homogeneousness that would come with such a future you dream of? For it, like we've already kind of seen this in plants where genetically modified crops will be modified not to enhance crop diversity or to give more options, but rather to create patented monocultures and increase market dominance of a few companies. What thought have you put into those concerns?
Yeah, no, so I assume everybody heard that question. It was very loud and well articulated. I appreciate that. Here's the thing is, well, number one, when you modify yourself as an adult, that won't be passed on to children or anything like that. So you don't really have to worry about affecting the population as a whole. Number two, me not wanting to be able to eat whatever I want, not wanting to be overweight or something like that, that's a personal preference for me. Sure, there's societal pressures and stuff like that, but I think no matter what your personal preference is, you should be able to do that, regardless of what it is, right? Because once you start dictating what people can and shouldn't do, that's eugenics, right? When a government starts to say, when anybody starts to say, this is what you can change about yourself, and this is what you can't change about yourself, right? That is forcing somebody to have something about their body that they might not want, right? I think we should all be able to choose whatever we want. The thing is, you can't choose. I can't choose right now. I can't choose what I look like, how I'm treated, anything about me. Nothing. Nobody can. And that sucks. And I think that leads to a lot of shitty stuff. Imagine if somebody sat here and said oh, black skin is caused by a single gene, melanin or something like that. And you could change that really simply. How do you think that people are going to respond to that? They're not going to be like, oh, damn, I'm super racist now against people who have a melanin gene. No, it breaks down those barriers, right? Because the only difference between me and this other person is this single gene that has nothing to do with anything besides skin color, right? It starts to break down these barriers once we understand that genes are easy to manipulate or easier to manipulate. I'm not saying anybody can manipulate anything or you could change your skin color tomorrow or anything like that. But once we understand that these things are so superficial, they're not defining who we are, I think that will lead to so much diversity. And sure, eugenics is possible, but that's government control. Like, if you give people choices, look at all of us in here. Look at any two of us. Do any two of us even look closely alike? You think that's going to change just because we can modify our genetics? Like, I don't think it will. I'm a lot more optimistic about society. You know, I think we'll all continue to look even more diverse, even more beautiful and cool, and be way more different. And I'm excited about that. You know, maybe it's possible to have a pessimistic viewpoint and think that, you know, everybody will want to look at like this ideal human being, which is something. But like, I don't know, what's ideal human being? Is it ideal to be really intelligent? Well, we don't really know what is intelligence, does creativity have anything to do with that? Is it ideal to be really athletic? I don't know, maybe you don't want big muscles. Maybe you don't want to be able to run fast. Maybe you don't want to be tall. Right? Like, all these things are just superficial traits that you can choose, possibly. I don't know. Yes?
I wanted to ask about in the battle, the classical battle of nature versus nurture, and how we're coming in as new players on the game field, and you know, in that dichotomy. I wanted to know, in regards to social change, in regards to biohacking, how social norms can impact, even if we genetically engineer humans in the future, how social norms can impact the epigenetic expression of certain genes that we turned on or turned off, and how the methylation of the promoters on those genes can basically, even if we genetically modify a human, are the epigenetic promoters in the Hox genes going to try and control them and turn them off, because that would be a generational response to the social norms that we, you know, as a society homogenize ourselves with. So it's social pressure can often lead to epigenetic pressure, which can lead to different genetic expression, even in twins. So I wanted to know what you think about that, because is it going to come to a point where being different becomes the norm, and then that makes the genetically modified genes that we turn on and off, you know, suppressed because of that social pressure? So.
Yeah, so question, there's some research that showed that like things like trauma can be passed through generations, through like epigenetics and stuff like that. Modifications to the DNA, not actually changes to DNA bases themselves. It's possible to modify epigenetics, just like it's possible to modify genetics. We don't understand it as well, and not really. We wouldn't necessarily know what changes to make, and these things can't. Here's the thing, is that like for me, there's already class stratification when we look at this stuff. $1 million gene therapy? Like, fuck, I can't afford that. You know, like, who can afford that? And the thing is if just universities, just big companies know how to use this technology, that's not going to change. It's going to get worse. The class stratification is going to get worse. Social stratification, all this stuff is going to get worse. When people start learning how to do this stuff, you know, when everybody knows how to use this technology, when it becomes something that almost everybody can do, that starts to challenge that power that these people have, right? It starts to say, like I said, you know, these $1 million gene therapies, how long is that going to last when people start pirating these drugs like they pirated software, right? Like, how long is that going to last? Are they going to start throwing people in jail for pirating these drugs? Like, wow, that's going to be an interesting world to live in. But I think, to me, biotechnology is one of those things that like you can do with your hands. You could go anywhere and teach somebody how to pipette, how to run a bioreactor. You know, all the stuff Doug's doing. You don't need a PhD to do this stuff. And that's the awesome thing, I think. I think you could go to low socioeconomic communities and teach people how to do this stuff and get them, you know, better job prospects than they had before. Like, I think biotechnology is a way to break down these social and class barriers. I think genetic engineering, you know, people can learn how to modify these epigenetics. And obviously, we can't save everything with genetic engineering, or even, many things. Like, there's always going to be shitty stuff that happens from everybody. It's just that hope that, like, maybe if more people learn how to use this stuff, maybe they can start taking some of the power back into their own hands. I hope.
Okay, so I had a fun question and a serious question. Serious one first. I find, like, I don't know, physics and natural selection to be like a really awe-inspiring phenomenon. It's like somebody says, do you believe in a higher power? I'm like, yeah, I believe in physics. But with genetic modification and ultimately what already exists, there's sort of this a new influence on genetics out there in the world and how things interact that is very under the influence of humans. And what I'm wondering is, just personally, are you more excited to see how this new influence affects even how natural ecosystems or how unmodified foods sort of are modified through multiple generations? Or are you more on the side of like, oh, it's sad that this is not sort of this unadulterated system that's unique and sort of just works on its own, but over long periods of time?
It's an interesting question. For me, like natural selection, evolution, change in allele frequency over time is really interesting because it means things are changing, constantly changing, right? Obviously, through evolution or natural selection, things have had a lot of time to change generally together. And that's what leads to these ecosystems and environments and stuff like that. But the one thing that's always remained constant is everything is changing, right? Things are evolving, things are finding their ecological niche, things are going extinct, right? These things always happen. Now, how should we play a role in that? I don't know, that's a tough question, right? Because we are changing things. Now, how much should we change things? That's a tough question, right? Because we're going to. It's like, unless all the humans are wiped off the earth, we're going to continue to change and modify things. And obviously, there should be a more holistic viewpoint on all this stuff, right? We should think about how things affect the environment and all the other ecosystems that they're interacting with. But, like, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I think that, like, I experiment. That's my life, right? I poke and I prod and I try something and I see the result and then I modify it and go on. So if I were to have an answer, I would say that same thing. Poke and prod, see what happens, try to do your best to move forward.
Thanks. My one question was, actually, if you hear something, was, so I had this weird freak health issue recently, and I had a stroke. I'm in my 20s and I had a stroke. What the?
Yeah.
How would you go about CRISPR influencing my genetics to hypothetically get my thalamus, the part of my brain that died off? I don't have sensation in my right hand and my right foot anymore, which sucks because I'm right-handed. But theoretically, how would you fix that?
She had a medical issue and she's wondering if CRISPR could fix. Here's the thing, if it doesn't really have a genetic underlying issue, or like if we don't understand the genetics that cause it, it's really hard to treat using CRISPR genetic modification. Not impossible, right? But really hard because we don't understand it enough yet, right? Like if you were to come up and tell me and say like, I had this mutation in this gene and that's what led to my blood clotting or something and then caused a stroke, then it'd be a lot easier. You could say, okay, well, maybe something like CRISPR or gene therapy could help alleviate this mutation you have in this gene. But general things, it's tough, because there are a lot of things just in the environment that affect us that, if you have one mutation in a cell in your body and it's in a bad spot, it can cause cancer, right? It's not necessarily a mutation all over your whole body, and that's like hard to predict or stop or anything like that. So these mutations are constantly happening. You have, so many cells, and they don't have all the same genes and genetics, right? Your skin cells getting exposed to UV light, they're mutated. Like, so many cells in your body are mutated and different. So it's a tough situation. But with genetics and genomics, I don't know if you've tried to get your genome sequenced or arrayed or anything like that, which I don't necessarily recommend because it's a huge privacy issue, I think, for the future. But like, maybe that could help provide insight. Maybe you could work with people who are doing these genomic studies that for people who've had similar issues. Maybe, but yeah.
So biotechnology and computers and all this stuff are all just kind of tools that help this kind of people who have this inspiration. And so, is there a possibility that there's 15 million people doing biomedical research in the United States? Because that's the people who are going to do it. The Odin and all these things may make it a little bit simpler and easier and cheaper for people to do that research, but they're not going to do it. I mean, I can do a lot of stuff on my MacBook, make some really great pictures. Do I? No. I want to make the best music in the world, and I have, it's a lot easier to make music than it was before. Do I do it? No. I mean, how do we get those millions of people that need to be interested and inspired in biotechnology to do it? We can make the tools the cheapest in the world. They won't necessarily do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So the question is like, how do we, get people to actually do biotechnology research, not just like give an amazing, funny speech and hope that they do. No, I think there needs to be incentives, right? Obviously there needs to be incentives. I grew up in, the late 90s computer hacking world, and I taught myself to program, and I think it was around the late 90s, everybody started getting offered jobs, right? The industry was like, we don't really care if you have a degree anymore. If you can prove to us that you know what you're doing, like, we'll hire you. And that was pretty commonplace, right? To get hired at a tech company doing programming, if you got programming chops, like, they don't care, right? And I think that's exactly what Doug is doing. And that's something that we're really interested in, is like getting people jobs. If you can incentivize, like, the best way to incentivize people, sadly, is money. I think, or fame, but usually money's pretty easy. And so if you can say like, hey, look, if you learn this technology, you can get a job, and not only that, you have a great possible career for your future. Like, I think that's the way. And, Doug's doing an amazing job. We're trying to push towards having classes, trying to work towards helping people get jobs, because I think that's the way you're really going to incentivize people. And it does require the industry to grow a little bit. Tech jobs still far outnumber biotech jobs, but it is growing. If you look on like Indeed.com and stuff like that, the number of entry-level biotech jobs are growing. And I think that's probably going to be the way. Or we have to come out with a movie like Hackers, because that really got my blood flowing. Yeah.
When you talked about Negro wings, or that'd be a cool one, do you have any ideas for plants?
For plants, what would I do with plants? I really like the idea of growing crops as big as a tree. I think that would be cool. Like, imagine if you had a strawberry tree. That's like my dream. I love strawberries. Like, so, you know what disappoints me so much? There's no strawberry juice, right? Like, if you try to go find like pure strawberry juice at Whole Foods or any place, they don't have it. And I don't know if it's because there's not enough strawberries in the world, but like, maybe if we have a strawberry tree, we'll have strawberry juice. It's always like adulterated. It has like apple juice or something in it, right? Pure strawberry juice. Where are you? All right, one more question.
Yeah, actually, I've heard you say a couple of times, talking about, well, it's kind of hard to think about.
Are you going to call me out?
You should do something versus whether you can do something.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to work out, but I've been working for 30 years in biotech, both in company, academia, government. And as part of those processes, you've got institutional review
Yeah, so the question is like, how do we provide safety regulation for people doing science outside traditional environments? And I think you're right. There's two ways to think about it. One is like people are like, fuck regulation, none of that. I don't know if I really come from that camp. And a good example I think is cars, right? Like, we have stoplights and stop signs and guardrails and all these things that like don't really infringe on our freedoms, but they protect us all, right? Like, you know, if you run through stop, it happens in Oklahoma. I see so many people running through red lights. I'm just like, holy cow, another accident. But these things are there to protect us, and they don't infringe on our rights. And I think you could do the same thing with biotechnology. You could set up certain, you know, stoplights and stop signs and guardrails that helps guide people in certain directions. And there are things already like this that are somewhat set up, right?
Yeah.
If you tried to order, say, a virus, get it synthesized, you'd be flagged, and the FBI, you know, I've met with the FBI and talked to them about a lot of this stuff. Like, you'd be flagged. That stuff is really hard to do.
I guess my question is, how much then are you going to stay within the regulatory environment of the BMDL, the NIH?
The thing is, there's not really a regulatory environment for this right now, which is interesting. Like you were saying before, a lot of regulations are institutionally imposed, like IRBs and stuff like that. Or
But those also come out of the NIH.
no, totally. But the NIH guidelines are just guidelines, and they only have to be followed if you have an NIH grant or similar.
But most places follow them, institutional places follow them, because then you're.
Totally. Like I said, they're institutionally imposed. I'm not saying that people shouldn't. What I'm saying is that a lot of these things are institutionally imposed, right? So right now there's no framework for this whatsoever. And I'm not saying that like I think that's the way it should be. I've talked to a ton of people and worked with a lot of people. Talked to the FBI, talked to policy people. I've given up. Like, the government moves so slow, I don't even know if anything will ever come about, right? Like, trying to get people to do this stuff is so difficult. And imagine, like, even if you try to create a document or a regulatory body and say, like, biohackers don't do this, like, how are you going to control some guy in rural Mississippi doing this in his shed, right? It starts to become a really complicated problem, and I don't know the answer for it, right? Is the answer, don't give people access to this technology? I think no, that's not the answer. We need to give people access to this technology. How do we control that? We need to find something, but I don't know the correct answer for you right now, fortunately. All right, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, let's give a big hand for Josiah. Thank you again. Thank you.